Okay. I'm going to be discussing the economics behind the daily fantasy sites DraftKings and FanDuel and the Lumi merger. A fantasy site is an online game where participants create a virtual team made up of all real-life players and compete based on the statistics that these players earn in actual games. Daily fantasy sites are just like real sports, besides the fact that these occur on a weekly basis. For example, instead of real season long, you do it for the entire season, but for daily, you do it on the weekly, and I play it for one Sunday. And there's also stuff such as 50-50s, where the top half of the participants win, and they get 90%. They get 180% of the money they put in. And tournaments, which bring in $1 million, if you get in the top spot of like 1 million people, everybody puts $1 in. And these are huge hits because of the fact that people do it for livings, and people see the opportunity of getting such high returns on their money if they end up having a good lineup. And for how the companies make money is they have something called a rake, which is varies between 5 to 15% based on the company and the type of tournament they put down. But how it works is if I do a 50-50 and I come the top half of the participants and I put $2 down, I would get $3.60 back. So they end up getting 40% of the $2 that I put down, 40% of the $4 winnings. So, So why did I choose this topic? I chose this topic because I've been in love with sports all my life. And I love gambling and statistics too. I did an entire statistics project last year on gambling and sports and the whole Vegas market. And this ties into the FanDuel, obviously, because it's a weekly betting thing. And also because my fantasy football league, which I started 5 years ago, and I've been doing every year since. And it's great. I love it. And my resources for this, I mostly just use news articles that had to do with the Lumi merger and statistics behind it, because I've been doing this, as I said, for 6 years now, and I've been doing FanDuel for 3, so I know a lot behind how the organization works, but I didn't know a lot about the economics behind it and how the merger was coming, because the merger was announced about a month ago, and the developments aren't even out yet, so every single day new stuff comes out, and we don't know all the details about it, but I've had to do a lot of research on that. And the main problems right now in the current economic market for FanDuel and DraftKings is advertising, decreasing demand growth, and legal issues in competition. And the problems with advertising have been, since there's 2 main companies in the daily fantasy market, DraftKings and FanDuel, which own about 99% of the market. And since they're so equal that they constantly have to spend a ton of money on advertising to out leverage the other company. And for example, in 2015, the company spent about $500 million in advertising alone, and then for decreasing demand growth, there's been a steady. In 2015, when they put that much amount of money into the advertising, there was a huge upsurge of demand. But then ever since then, there's been legal issues, and the demand hasn't been that much. But it also demand kind of differs based on the season and the year. Like for football, it really increases because football's like America's most popular sport. Then when football's out of season, the only sports that are really popular are basketball and baseball. Baseball is not huge. And then the legal issues, in FanDuel and DraftKings and all daily fantasy sports, they've been accused of being related to online gambling, which is obviously illegal. But they've constantly had to go back and forth the past 2 years with the courts about whether it's legal or not, because there's an argument that FanDuel and DraftKings takes skill. So technically, it's not gambling because there's skill involved. And then also, the competition, as I said before, with the constant head-to-head, not either company has an outright advantage on the other. And my thesis for my project was that currently DraftKings and FanDuel are struggling for numerous reasons, but the forthcoming merger can lead to much economic perspiration, which I'll be talking about in a little bit, about the future solutions that could happen with the merger. But what I was saying before is that the problems with they had to have an insane amount of fundraising because the amount of money they put into advertising, because they both put $500 million last year, and they're actually both not making a profit right now. And their cost per new user is very expensive, as DraftKings is $174 and FanDuel's is $123, which is incredibly expensive because they're not really expected to get that much money from each new user they obtain, because the prices for an entry fee go as low as 25 cents, so it's pretty hard for them to get $174 from DraftKings. That means the average new user would need to spend need to put in at least $1,740, which is very unlikely. And the legal issues have been a big issue because they've been shut down in about 5 states, and speculation has caused in many states for them to not for users to not be allowed to put money into the Daily Fantasy and DraftKings websites, and it also has deterred a lot of business because people are kind of scared of the looming issues that can happen. And for utility maximization is a key economic concept involved in DraftKings. This is because when somebody plays on a daily fantasy site, they are given a fixed amount of money that they are allowed to spend on players who would vary on price based on skill and matchup. The goal for the consumer is to make the lineup that scores the highest possible amount of points, and these points are accumulated by statistics that the chosen player acquires on game day. Utility maximization occurs in the daily fantasy sports industry because each consumer is given a set amount of salary, and they're assumed to be rational, desiring the greatest amount of points with the given salary they have. And budget constraints are obviously an issue because with daily fantasy, each person's given the same amount of money, so they each have to determine the best lineup they can possibly get with that amount of salary that they have. And the elasticity of the market has a lot to do with the competition they have. Currently, the daily fantasy market is highly elastic because, as I said before, DraftKings and FanDuel are very similar. And if one company were to change something with their site and maybe increase the rate that they got, or do other stuff that would maybe deter a customer, then they would easily just go to the other company since there's not much of a difference between the two. And there's no like any small increase in price would cause a large increase in drop in demand, or a large drop in demand. And the demand is also a question mark because it varies highly in the sports season, as I said before. And it's hard to tell if it's slowly growing or it's possibly at a peak. There's been contemplations that it's kind of met its climax after last year with the 2015 increase in advertising spending. And since it's gone down, nobody's really sure whether or not it's going to go back up or is it slowly going to keep going up, which it seems like it might be doing. And here's one of my possible solutions. I have 3. And this one is with the merger. One of the reasons why I think that the economics might be successful is because the decreased amount of competitive competition in the market and name recognition spending. And some direct effects that would be caused with the merger would be that there'd be a decreased cost in advertising spending immediately because, as I said before, they spent a lot of money before on advertising. But if if DraftKings and FanDuel were to merge as one big company, which is most likely going to happen, they would pretty much have a monopoly on the market, which isn't necessarily fair, but they wouldn't have to spend much on advertising because everybody knows the name. And in the long run, there would be, with the decreased cost up front, it would be less financial trouble, and it would be a possible decrease in name recognition, but I think that would be outweighed by the less financial struggle because that's kind of where the whole root of the problem has been for DraftKings and FanDuel. And this graph right here shows the amount of spending they've had on with advertising, and it shows how last year they kind of put a little bit in May and April. This was kind of right before the summer and towards the beginning of baseball season, and then September and October last year there's a huge spike because that's the beginning of football season. So that's obviously their peak market, and then ever since then it's been way down, not even close to what it was before. But this would help a lot of the merged companies' financial state and small companies because it would give the 1% of the other companies that don't have a monopoly on the market a chance to maybe make up some ground, even though I don't think that would be really likely. But the fact that a monopoly would possibly make some people go to different companies. And this would also make it a lot less elastic because this merged company could probably increase their rate and nobody would really leave because they kind of control the entire market. And also, there's been television networks have been down a lot this past year because in 2015, so much of their earnings and commercial and people who consume the commercials were through DraftKings and FanDuel. Because if you watched any single sport last year, you would see so many DraftKings and FanDuel commercials. But since they've pretty much cut it down by about 10% of what they spent in 2015, television networks are kind of looking for people to put on the commercials, and they're not getting as much money because of that. And this is my solution number 2, is that this has to do with supply and demand, where increased supply of consumers, because they would all come to one company, and increased charge of customer, as I said before, the elasticity. And as I said before also, with significantly larger profits, this would come from not having spent on advertising and having a larger consumer base, and decreased elasticity and monopoly on the market, as well as the one proposition that could possibly hurt them is the fact that if somebody were bringing up to the courts the fact that they have a monopoly on the market, and obviously there's antitrust laws that go against have a monopoly on any market is just kind of, it's so unknown what's going to happen with this merger yet because it only was announced a month ago and so little details are out. But the final solution is expansion to season-long fantasy markets, which is huge. This has been a talk, only a rumor that I've heard about the merger when I've been reading stuff, but the fact that season-long fantasy markets is such a bigger thing. As you can see here, fantasy sports make more money than real sports based on like the fantasy sports. This is basically all fantasy long sports and shows how much money there really is in the market, about $40 to $70 billion. And there's no need for increased capital, or there is an increase, sorry. There's a need for increased capital, need for advertising, and increased consumer base. It's kind of a risky move to win the fantasy market because it's so competitive with Yahoo, NFL, ESPN. They all kind of have a huge take in it, but I think that if they were to have exposure to this market, that they would maybe have a chance because people who are loyal with loyalty branding to DraftKings and FanDuel through their daily would maybe end up playing season long, and that would increase their consumer base. As well as, I think that even if they got like a little percent of the market, I think they can make a lot of money off it just because of how big the fantasy sports world really is. But the problem with that is, as I said here, the need for increased capital, need for advertising kind of puts them back into that place where it's so much upfront cost that's really risky. And for my future research in the merger, future research on the daily fantasy sites, I would be researching the merger because that's obviously what I said before about how it's really unknown and how that's kind of where it all revolves around the future of daily fantasy sports. And I would be able to see if my solutions were correct and that it would probably help them with they would have a bright future because of the merger. And thank you for coming. And anybody have any questions? Yes.
How are the season-long fantasy sports making so much money compared to like regular sports?
Because the demand. Because the demand for season-long sports, because it's such a small market for daily fantasy sports, because it's only people.
But like, where is the money in like?
That's what my question too. So how do you like with being naive to it? When you sign up, you give a certain amount of money, and you can bet like how much you're willing.
Yeah, for daily.
For daily.
Yeah,
okay.
For season long, I'm not exactly sure where the money comes from, but it'd probably come from advertising and also once you start using ESPN for fantasy football, then you start using it more for everything else too, so they make a lot of money off of that. And other companies as well, probably about the same. And some companies also, like Yahoo, if you do season long there, they take a rake too. But that's obviously not that much, but they probably get a lot of just from the consumer base and the increased demand.
Is there also a market for like, I guess, sites that offer advice, as in, I don't know, the ESPN Insider?
Yeah,
or
there is, but it's so specific right now that it's more. They're also not linked to DraftKings and FanDuel. They're separate companies, but it's such as it's like.
Does that contribute to the larger market as a whole, though? I mean, part of that 40 to 70 billion.
Oh, probably not because it's not such a. This is average. If you think about it, the average fantasy football player isn't super into it. It's only the really into it people or the really competitive people that are going to be using those sites. So it's kind of a small demand probably.
Where does demand growth come from? So when they are trying to get new demand, is it from existing users or new users who've never done it before?
Probably a lot of both, because if you think about it, people who get hooked, I mean, it is kind of gambling. So if you kind of get hooked on it and you end up losing money, you're going to put more in. And the people who are doing more and keep putting that amount of money in, so you have so much money being put in each week. It doesn't really seem like if people are losing, they're really going to stop, because they could easily get addicted to it. And also with the advertising, there's new consumers coming to the market, and it goes to such a small piece of the fantasy market right now that more people are getting more into fantasy football, and fantasy sports are such a big thing now that it's just constantly growing. So people are getting more and more into it.
And they're not publicly traded companies?
No, they're not.
And that's why they can merge.
Yeah.
And create stability.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you.